Hello and welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining me in the office today for our lesson and for our webinar and for our webcast. This is Excel tables and data models, the Excel features you need to master, part 1. I am so excited to be able to present and teach this course to you, as I feel like this is an Excel skill that everybody should have and everybody should know. Data modeling is becoming an imperative feature and function of Excel usage. Increasingly, we want to be working with larger and bigger sets of data. And as such, we need the abilities to be able to process that data and work with that data inside of Excel. And how do we do that? We do that through the data model. And through the data model, it allows us to be able to expand what we're working with, and it allows us to be able to more easily process that information and data. And so in today's course, we're going to be looking at not only the data model, but also the table features and functions that go along with it. And often with them, they are taught simultaneously with each other because they're so useful and interdependent on each other. If you're using tables, you can easily use data models. If you can use data modeling, guess what? You're going to be using tables. So with this, let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to be discussing today. Now, this is going to be the first of a multi-part series with respect to the tables and data models inside of Excel. Today's class, we're really going to kind of introduce these features and functions with respect to how these things work, where you can find them, some different ways of utilizing these things. We'll talk about some of the ways that we can structure references and formulas and how we can essentially build upon this in later courses for really kind of taking this functionality to the upper limit. In future courses, for example, we're going to talk about Power Pivot. We're going to talk about Power Query. We're going to talk about ways that we can process this data in a meaningful way to really kind of ease the way that we access and work with information inside of Excel. So with respect to this is what we're going to go ahead and cover. We're going to get through, and we've got some sample files that if you're interested in working with today, you can follow along with the presentation and start learning how to use tables inside of your work. Alrighty. Now, I do want to remind you that this podcast, this webinar, is eligible for CPE credit. If you're interested in earning credit for today's class, it's super simple. Head over to cpetoday.com and you can purchase this course. With your purchase, you will get the learning materials that come along with today's webcast and podcast. You'll get copies of the book that I'll be teaching from today, as well as the ability to take a short exam. The short exam is 5 questions, and upon successful completion of that quiz, you will receive a certificate that is valid for 1 CPE credit. Easy peasy. Today's course code is ECX1, okay? So please use ECX1 as your course code to find today's course, and in just a couple of minutes, you could pass today's exam and you will be able to earn a credit. So please check us out if you're interested in learning about and earning a credit for today's course. And if you're not here for CPE credit, thanks for watching. Leave us a comment. Consider liking and subscribing our channel for more great technology and accounting topics to come. All right, just a quick disclaimer with respect to our course for today. And let's go ahead and dive right into the material. So today's course is, again, going to focus on tables and data models. And what I want to do first is I want to really kind of highlight what these functions are, explain in a nutshell what they do, and then also explain how they're interdependent on each other. And from there, we're pretty much going to be spending the entire day in our podcast for today inside of Excel. So if you're listening, you might want to consider maybe jumping on YouTube and watching our content there, or again, cpetoday.com if you'd like to watch from there and actually watch as we kind of do some of these things. But I'll do the best I can to kind of narrate how and where these tools are useful. Okay, so we have tables and we have data models. A table is a container of data inside of Excel. And what a table allows us to do is it allows us to treat Excel kind of like a quasi-database in some respects. And when we add data modeling on top of that, it really does become that kind of quasi-database functionality that we can find inside of Excel. It's not quite a spreadsheet. It's not quite A database is kind of somewhere in between. And it's a really efficient way of storing data inside of Excel, and it's a really efficient way of utilizing Excel workbooks. It speeds up our access with respect to the data itself. It speeds up our processing of this data. It expands our ability to store more data. It makes referencing formulas much faster and easier. And overall, it's just a really, really efficient way of storing information inside of Excel. And really, it's not that different than what you are currently doing in Excel today. If you are working with an Excel workbook, let's think about this holistically, and let's think about a big picture. What exactly is an Excel workbook? Well, an Excel workbook is a collection of worksheets. What is a worksheet? A worksheet is a collection of rows and columns. What are rows and columns? Are a collection of individual cells. Now, what a table does is it just kind of provides some more structure around that collection of cells. It's more than just kind of a spreadsheet in of itself. It's a defined container of data for your workbook. And so it makes things like formulas inside spreadsheets so much faster and better. It makes creating, for example, charts and graphs so much better, or pivot tables so much better. And I'm going to explain a lot of those features and functions that go along with it today. Okay, so that's kind of what a table is. A table is no more different than a Excel workbook. It just has a little bit more structure around it. Now, tables have 7 features that I think really kind of make them compelling to use. And these 7 features are the main reason why I use tables on a day-to-day basis. And I, in fact, probably use tables for just about every project I do inside of Excel. They're useful in pretty much any time that you're going to want to store and structure data inside of your workbook. Okay, so what are some of these main features and functions of what they do? And we're going to dive into each one of these here as we kind of work through our example files, so you'll be able to see firsthand with respect to what they do. So first and foremost, they're fantastic for formatting. I see way too many professionals spending way too much time with respect to formatting their workbooks and getting everything to look pretty and getting everything to look a certain way. Now, to be honest, if you're a professional accountant, there are some design standards that we need to follow with respect to how our workbooks look. I mean, if we look at the statements of our accounting standards, I mean, there are some very specific ways with respect to how an income statement should look and a balance sheet should work. And I'm not really talking about that. Let's just put that onto the shelf for a moment. What I'm really talking about is just people trying to make their sales report look good, their payroll journal look good. And they could be benefited so much by using a table inside of Excel, because in Excel, a table allows for programmatic formatting. And I'll show you very clearly how that works. And with that programmatic formatting, things like certain colors, the banding of columns, the alternating of colors, things of this nature turn off and on very easily. And it makes it great if we're going to be increasing the amount of data that we're going to be storing in the future. Okay. The next big major feature of tables is the fact that they're dynamically sized. With respect to the location of the data, tables will automatically grow as you add more information to them. And so if you add additional rows to the bottom, so think of, you're pulling data in from the web using Power Query, or if you're pulling in data from another workbook or a database, as you go from 1,000 records to 1,200 records, that table is going to grow automatically with you. Additionally, if you add more columns to the right, and only to the right, it will automatically pick up those additional columns and will include and spill over, for lack of a better way of saying it, for example, the styling or any structured references or formulas that might be there would automatically apply to those additional columns and rows. So they make them great, for example, as being a precursor function to something like a pivot table. And I'll show you this very cleanly and clearly when we go to our demonstration section here, where we're going to create a pivot table, and then I'm going to create a pivot table from a table, and you're going to kind of see where that benefit will be in the fact that it can automatically and dynamically resize, because you never have to redefine the source. You never have to go back and say, hey, pivot table, it doesn't end on row 500, it ends on row 512. Well, if it's in the scope of the table, guess what? It's in the scope of whatever is referencing that table. So that automatic resizing automatically makes it the go-to thing I'm going to use anytime I'm going to create a pivot table. So you should get in the habit of, if you're creating a pivot table, first you create a table from your data, then you create a pivot table from there. They make referencing things inside of formulas so much better and easier. If you've ever done like a VLOOKUP or an index and match, and frankly, those are things that most of us are doing on a regular basis, well, writing structured formulas inside of using table data is a breeze. Instead of having to remember where something is located, instead I reference the table and then the columns that I would like to use for that formula. And it allows me to be able to read the formula like a sentence. It says, hey, go to this table, go to this column, and use this particular data. So it makes it really, really easy to be able to write formulas. And the auditability of these formulas down the road goes up tremendously. You know what? Because now all I have to do is just read it. And so I can clearly see what table and what formulas and what columns that formula is using. It makes it fantastic to easily filter and structure sourcing for and sorting for our data. So with respect to this, I can easily filter to take items out or to zero in on something. Maybe, for example, I'm using a slicer, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Or I'm choosing to sort my data in either increasing or decreasing order, A to Z, Z to A, or whatever like that. It makes sorting our data very fast and very easy. And there's actually a lot of hidden features inside of sorting that most people aren't familiar with. Tables allow for self-replication of formulas. Let's say I've got a big old table of data, and as new rows are being added for new records, well, guess what? That table is going to stay up to date. And if I wrote a formula in column D, for example, we're going to see that formula auto-replicate as additional values are being added to that table. So it makes for dynamic data sets really useful and really wonderful in terms of being able to update and work with. It also allows us to do summary rows, okay? So with the summary row, that allows me, for example, to add a total row at the bottom, so I can add up all the items above it. I can average those things. I can count those things. I can do any type of arithmetic operation on that that's available in the subtotal formula. I can actually do directly on that table. So instead of having to automatically add a row to the bottom, guess what? I can just do that by clicking a button inside of the table design menu, and that will automatically be added for me there. Now, the last feature and function of a data table, which is probably one of the more valuable ones, is going to be the fact that with a table, we can data model. With that table, we can include this table and every other table inside of this workbook inside of a model that allows me to be able to then use that model for multiple other operations inside of Excel. If you've ever, for example, wanted to create a pivot table for multiple worksheets, you've got a worksheet with sales, a worksheet for costs, and you want to be able to put that into one single pivot table, you've probably been frustrated at some point because guess what? Pivot tables can only look at one thing at a time. They can't look at two workbooks or two worksheets or even two different sets of data on the same page. It all has to be congruent. Well, guess what? With data modeling, we can combine multiple different tables inside of Excel, and we can then report upon those. And so for expanding our reporting abilities to include additional things inside of our workbook, we can easily do that with data modeling inside of Excel. And it all comes from the power of tables. Don't worry, if you've never seen this feature and function before, it's going to make sense as we start to work through this. Now, a little spotlight with respect to what the heck is a data model inside of Excel. What does that mean? Okay, well, the data model is essentially data coming from multiple tables. We're building a relational data source inside of an Excel workbook. Now, a relational data source is, again, it's kind of like the foundational principle behind working with a database is that relational data model. And so we can kind of treat Excel like a quasi-database when we're using tables and data models. And it's a great introduction if you've never worked with a database before to kind of get started working with data modeling inside of Excel. You can do it all very easily, and it's very approachable, much more so than if you were to work with a SQL Server or something else like that. Now, within Excel, you only ever have a data model for an entire workbook. You'd never have multiple data models, so a workbook can only have one data model at a time. But that data model can be used all over the place, whether you're trying to prepare a pivot table that's looking at multiple things inside of an Excel workbook or a pivot chart or something else like that. That data model gives you that ability to, A, use more data than you probably normally would use, and allows you to more easily organize that. And we'll take a look at expanding our use of data using tools such as Power Pivot in future podcasts. And it also makes it easier to be able to organize that and refresh it. And if you are working with dynamic data sources, information coming from an e-commerce system, a payroll system, or something like that, this is a no-brainer. It's gonna be so simple and so easy for you. And so what should you think about a pivot table, or what should you think about a data model? Well, think of it as a collection of tables that you kind of organize through common keys, okay? In the relational data model, we organize data based off of tables. We organize them based off of keys, so things are singularly focused into a single table, and that table might be customers, it might be vendors, it might be checks. And then there'll be some sort of key that represents records inside of that table. It might be customer ID, it might be check number, it might be PO number, it might be something like that. Well, we use that to relate to other tables inside of it. So if we want to be able to kind of pull information dynamically across different parts of Excel, having a collection of tables related together in a data model through keys is going to be how we do it. And I'll show you where all that features and functions live. So lots of great stuff coming. In my opinion, this is probably one of the fields that I don't think gets addressed enough with respect to users, and it's absolutely a rung on the ladder as you move up move up the skill level with Excel. And effectively using data modeling, effectively using tables, in my mind, is what separates a beginner user from Excel from a power user of Excel. All right, so let's go ahead and have our first review question for our podcast. What is not a feature of an Excel data table? Okay, is it automatic formula replication? Is it automatic expansion of new data? Having a workbook with more than 1 million rows, so can a data table get around the capacity limitations of 1 million rows? Okay, is it easily applying styling and formatting? Okay, so what are the answers there? Well, what is not a feature? Well, data tables will not directly get you around having that 1 million row capacity. Excel has a capacity limitation of about 1 million rows or so. It's a little bit more than that. But tables do not get you around that 1 million capacity. However, utilizing tools like Power Pivot, where we're dynamically loading in data to our data model and basically using Excel almost like a query tool. So we're using Power Pivot as the way we access data, and then data modeling and tables as the container for that data, absolutely can get around us that 1 million. So tables in and of themselves don't get us around that 1 million, but other features and functions in conjunction with that, that's how we're going to get around that 1 million. And in future podcasts, we're going to take a deep look with respect to how we use Power Pivot and how we can dynamically pull in our data from these other sources to kind of work with, and increasingly more people need this, the ability to kind of work with larger and larger data sets. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch over here, and let's go to our hands-on section for today. And we're going to basically take a tour through table functionality and data modeling functionality to kind of give you a sense of where and how these functions work. Now, I want to point out to you, if you purchase today's course, you can go to cpetoday.com. You can download our sample materials for today's broadcast, and you can work with the files that I've provided to you, and they're all just right here. I've got a bunch of different files that are going to be looking at not only the design for these Excel tables, but how to apply formatting, how to do structured references. We're going to look a lot through that. So if you'd like to give this a spin for yourself, by all means, please check out cpetoday.com and use course code ECX1 to access today's materials. All right, just give me a second here. Alrighty. Okay, so what we have here is we have a table of data. Now, this isn't actually an Excel data. This is essentially data that we have normally structured inside of Excel to begin with. And you might say, hey, Steve, this looks an awful lot like data to me. This looks an awful lot like a table to me. And you're not wrong. I mean, if you think of, again, like a table is really just a collection of rows and a collection of columns. This, in fact, does have rows and columns. However, a table is a purpose purposeful thing with respect to how we utilize and work with data inside of Excel. It's something that we add to the workbook. Okay. Now, there's a couple different ways that we can add tables to our Excel workbook. Now, the most direct way would either be to use a keyboard shortcut or to go through the ribbon navigation to add the tables in here. You can also, for example, dynamically create a table by using something like Power Query. And we'll look at that third option with respect to creating tables sometime soon in a future podcast. So just be aware that that is something that we can do. But most of the time, what we're doing is that we are working with data that is already inside of Excel, and we're looking to kind of put a little bit more organization around that data. Okay, now the way that we're going to want to go ahead and create this data over here, I'll show you a couple of different ways that we can handle this. We're going to want to come up here to the Insert menu, for example, and right next to Pivot Table, you'll see the table icon listed right here in the ribbon. Okay, now what you want to do before you actually go to create your table is make sure that your data is congruent. You want to make sure, for example, that the data itself is all touching. Let me just go ahead and show you what it looks like when we don't have that data touching here. So let's just go ahead and insert another row, and let's just go over here and another column. Let's come over here and insert another row, and let's go ahead and create our table. Okay. Now you'll notice when I go to create my table here, it's automatically going to want to seek out where that data starts and stops. And so if we see here, for example, let's just go into A2 through F10. Okay. So we're missing, for example, everything below row 10 and everything to the right of column F. Now, one of the best practices with respect to creating a table is that first you want to make your data congruent. You want to make sure everything is touching. You want to make sure that there's no completely blank columns and no completely blank rows. You can certainly make a table that includes blank cells. That's not a problem. But generally, tables prefer to be touching everything inside of it. So we don't need to, for example, add spacing columns and spacing rows. We want to remove those as we kind of go through this process. Okay, so we want to make sure that everything is touching. Now, this is also true for pivot tables. If we're creating pivot tables, we absolutely do not want blank columns and rows. And so what I like to say again is if you're ever going to create a pivot table, first you want to go through and you want to remove those blank columns and rows. Well, if you create a table, you're doing that. And so it's kind of a nice leading up way of creating your pivot table. And so I'm just going to go ahead and remove those blank columns and rows. I want everything touching, and that's just the way that we're going to want to do it. Now, you can leave totals in here. Depending on what you're doing, you may or may not want them in the future. For example, if we're going to create a pivot table, generally I don't want to include totals or subtotals because my pivot table is going to create those for me. But we're going to leave it in here for the time being because we're just going to look at tables. Now, everything's touching. That's all great. Your data does not have to be the absolute first row inside of the workbook. You can actually create a table anywhere inside of Excel. So you could be the 10th column over, the 15th row down. That's all good and fine. There's no issues with respect to that because the table is going to have its own numbering system with respect to rows and columns. And when we reference things in formulas going forward, we're actually referencing the position of something relative to the table itself. So this is not actually our first row here, row 2. Okay, our first row is actually row 3 here because when we reference things, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, we're referencing relative to the table itself. Alrighty, so to go and create a table from here, we're going to come back up here to our Insert menu. We're going to select Tables. And we're going to go ahead and select this. And what you'll notice is that pretty much straight away, the first option that we have is going to be with respect to where the table is located and then also what we should do and if we have headers. Now, this is a really good practice to get in. And I would tell you that what you should have is that you should have always your data touching, as I mentioned, but you should also always have headers. It's definitely a best practice, for example, to use headers inside of your table. Now, so if you've come to this point so far and you don't have a header row, personally, I'd recommend you hit cancel and you go ahead and you add that. Now, if we don't indicate that we have headers and we go ahead and we click OK here, you'll notice it's still going to create this, but what we've done here is that we've created Row 1 is our actual headers, okay? So if we haven't created this, it's just going to call everything column 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's technically you could do that, although I will tell you in practice that was not something that you should do. Okay, we can also use the Control T shortcut. And again, as long as the data is congruent, you'll see that it'll create it. And so let's go ahead and proceed with respect to creation of our tables. So we're going to go ahead and click OK here. And in fact, we now have a table set. Now, you can instantly know you're in a table two ways. Generally, if you see this banding rows like this, that almost always indicates that you are in a table of some sort. You could certainly do this manually, but generally with tables, you would see this programmatically being applied. So it makes it really easy to tell that, hey, this is a table because, truthfully, most of us don't have that kind of discipline to get the banding, the alternating colors that clear. Now, the other telltale sign that you're working with the table is if you come up here to the ribbon, you'll see that when you're in a table, you have the table design menu that automatically pops up. Okay. Now, if I take my active cell out of the table and I click over here, you'll notice that table tools and table design menu goes away. Okay. It's a contextual aware menu. It's only going to be present when we're actually in the table itself, and we'll see that menu option pop up. Now, I want you to get in the best practice of immediately naming your table the second that you create it. So if we, for example, we come over here, you'll see that this is called table 3, okay? Because I've got some other tables inside of here, and generally what we also want to do is give these a name, okay? Your first table will be called table 1 in a workbook. Your second table will be called table 2, so on and so forth. And if you're starting to reference these things, generally you're not going to remember what the heck table 1, table 2, table 3. And so you want to give them a good name. In this particular instance, we're going to just call this one sales, because this is a sales journal that we're looking at, and we're seeing our sales across products A through F. And we want to just reference this as sales. Okay. Now, much like a defined name inside of Excel, the nice thing about this is once we've given it that name, we can easily reference whatever we would like to reference, kind of going forward from there. Okay. Now, with that defined name, that is how we're going to reference this everything going forward, whether we're dealing with columns, whether we're dealing with individual records or whatever. But it's always best to create your table and then immediately give that table a name. Now, let's talk about some of the other features that are on this menu bar and inside of this ribbon. So if we look up here, over here on the far left, we've got our table name. You'll see right below it is the resize table functionality. If we click that resize table functionality, you'll notice it will pop up and give us the ability to resize this. Now, if we want to make it bigger, smaller, we can manually do this. But again, I want to point out that tables will automatically grow as you add new records below or to the right. So most of the time, there's no need to actually manually resize it, but it's there if you'd like it to be there. Okay. Moving down our list of tools here, we can see we can summarize this with a pivot table. What's nice about this, in one click, we can go ahead and we can summarize this and create a pivot table from this data present. Okay. Now with this, you'll notice when we go to create our pivot table, it's not actually saying, hey, raw data, A1 through G605, you'll see it says the name of the table, sales. Okay. Now, this is one of the best things with respect to tables inside of Excel. If it's in the scope of the table, it's in the scope of the pivot table. So if the data is loaded in the table, it's going to be loaded into the pivot table. For those of you who've worked with pivot tables for a long time, for example, that when you add new columns, you add new rows, you've got to go back into that pivot table and you have to redefine the source, adding the additional columns, adding the additional rows in it. Okay. With a table, you don't have to. The table's dynamic. So right now it says sales. If we were to go create a pivot table from this, anything inside of the sales table would be included in the sales pivot table that we would create from this data. Now, more on this in a little bit, but I do want to draw your attention to a tiny, tiny little checkbox that adds so much powerful value. Add this data to the data model. Okay, so in future podcasts, when we start to really kind of explore the data modeling capabilities of Excel, that little box has so much power and so much capability on it. So we're not going to go into it right now, but just remember that little box is there, okay? And that, for a lot of people, that's how they initialize. Not the only way, but that's for a lot of people how they initialize their data modeling inside of Excel is through this little box and through pivot tables. So we can, in one click, really kind of create our pivot table directly inside of Excel. Now, other functions that we would commonly want to use, removing duplicates as an example. So if we want to remove any duplicate data listed here, we can certainly do that. Very similar, and in fact, it's the same feature and function that if you were to go over to the Data tab right over here inside of Excel, you'd see that same button listed. Okay. Now, if we ever need to get rid of our table, and the only time I could ever see that you'd want to get rid of your table is if you needed to share this with somebody who is not using a version of Excel that supported tables. And the tables have been supported, I'm going to say, since either 2007 or 2013. I think it's 7. So I can't imagine there's too many people running old versions of Excel, and hopefully none, because there's security issues that go along with it. But if you ever needed to remove the table functionality, we can go ahead and click this convert to range, and in doing so, it will remove everything but the visual appearance. So it's going to leave, for example, the banded rows, but you'll notice when we're in here, that table design menu goes away. So that's a way we can get rid of our table if we wanted to. But why the heck would you? We can very easily add and create a slicer from here. So we'll talk more about slicers when we get to our sorting and filtering podcast in a couple of weeks. We can export this and link this to other aspects. So if, for example, if we want to take this and we want to export this to SharePoint for our organization, we can. Okay. Now, on the right-hand side of this, what we have is a listing. Let me make this a little bit bigger for our zoom here, of some of our visual appearance options. You'll notice that we've got checkboxes on a variety of UI components, header row, total row, banded rows, things of this nature. One of the beautiful things about Excel is the fact that when we're working with this is that we can choose, for example, what visual appearances should be listed on this table. We don't have to manually add, for example, a header row or a total row or change the colors and things of this nature. We can turn these different visual appearances on or off. And if we scroll over here to the right, you'll see there's a variety of pre-built styles. So that if we don't want a blue one, we can very quickly make it red, purple, green, or kind of whatever we'd like. You'll see, for example, there are a lot of options with respect to different visual appearances for how this looks and functions. Okay, let's go back to our generic blue. Now, these little checkboxes do a lot of different things. For example, if I want to turn on the styling for my header row or completely remove it, I can do that. Okay. Now, another thing I want to point out with the header row, this is kind of a cool trick. Most folks, for example, when they want to freeze the top row, let me just go ahead and remove our row 1 here. Okay. And let's say I want to keep this top row in place as I'm scrolling down. Well, what most folks do, not using tables, is they'll come over here to the view menu. And from the view menu, they'll choose freeze panes, and they're going to go ahead and choose that freeze top row. And in doing so, as they scroll down, that top row stays static. Now, you don't need to do that with tables. What's kind of beautiful about it is the fact that if we enable our header row, let me just go ahead and unfreeze this now, and let's go ahead and scroll back down on this. Watch what happens to column A, B, and C here, date, product A, and B. Okay, as we scroll down, you'll notice that's no longer column A, okay? That's now the date column. This is no longer column B. That is product A column, so on and so forth. So it kind of saves you a couple of extra clicks with respect to sorting and organizing your data. Now, if we turn off our header row and we scroll down, you'll see those will go back to column A, B, C, D, so on and so forth, but we can turn it on or off. Okay, so that header row can be a quite nice function listed here. Okay, now some of the other things that we can do with respect to this is that we can turn on or off banding. Okay, banding is the alternating of colors inside of our tables, and we can do it both in terms of rows and columns. So if we turn off banded rows, for example, you'll see it just kind of goes all generic white. Now, I'm a big fan of banded rows because you know what? It makes seeing things so much easier and easier to work with, from the usability perspective. Okay, now we can also stylize our first column if we want. Notice when I click this first column, it will bold that first column. If we click our last column, you'll see it'll bold our last column as well. In fact, we can get real crazy with it and choose banded columns. I never use this view because it's a little too much for me, but we can actually band our columns, so maybe sometimes, for example, just banding the columns might be better instead of banding the rows, just depending on how your data is oriented. Now, we also have another button up here called filter. And so with this filter button, you'll notice when we click that, it turns off and on our ability to sort and filter the data. And so if we come up here, this is how we can sort, for example, smallest to largest, and so on and so forth, or we can come over here to our date options and sort newest to oldest, so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to spend a good amount of time in our next podcast, in a future podcast, I should say, kind of going through those sorting and filtering options. This is really kind of just intended to give you a nice walkthrough today. But I will point out that with respect to the sorting and filtering, it's never easier than being in a table. It's just a breeze with respect to organization of the data itself. And so this filter button is the same as the filter button over here in the data, ribbon. Okay, it's that same button here. And so we can turn it off or on. In fact, you'll see a lot throughout Excel, functionalities repeated. You'll see it in a couple of different places depending on what you're doing. Okay, so that is kind of our general UI and some of the general features and functions, but this is honestly just scratching the surface with respect to our features and functions with tables. Let's go ahead and have another review question here, and then we will continue our tour. Okay, so our next review question: which of the following methods can be used to create a table inside of Excel? Okay, can you create a table from the ribbon? Can you create a table with a keyboard shortcut? Can you create a table from external sources, or all of the above? Okay, the correct answer here is all of the above. Tables can be created a number of different ways, and depending on what you're doing inside of Excel, you might use one or multiple methods. And sometimes I use in the same project 3 or 4 different methods, or 2 or 3 different methods anyways, to create that table. But more often than not, I'm using keyboard shortcuts, and I am loading that data in from external sources. And when we talk about Power Query, that will be really, really useful, a really, really useful way of creating tables inside of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue our tour with respect to our features and functions. Now, the other thing I want to show you is this total row. Let me scroll to the bottom of our data set here so you can get a sense of our data. Now, you'll notice below down here that we don't have a total row. Now, what a lot of people do is that they will select, for example, a range of data just like this, and then from the Home tab, they will choose to auto sum this data. And in doing so, we'll see that that data will automatically add a total row to the bottom, which is a great way of handling it. Okay, so we can just select the whole thing here, and we can add that total row below. Additionally, you'll notice in newer versions of Excel, you also have this quick analysis option too. And if we click this quick analysis options, you'll see over here, total, and we can actually add a total down here as well. Let me just make this column a little bit bigger. And you can see that's another way of creating it. The good news is with working with tables, it's actually simpler than that with respect to creating our totals. Okay. So let me just remove our total row, and let's just come down to the bottom so you can kind of see this. Alrighty. And what we want to do is make sure that our active cell is inside of the data set. And from the table design menu, okay, we're going to choose total row. And if we turn on total row, you'll notice it automatically adds that total row. We can go ahead and we can remove and add it as needed. It'll just come on and off as we click it. Okay, make that a little bit bigger. Now, we're not limited to just doing a total. If we expand this, you'll see there's a little drop-down menu next to it, and we have a couple of different options. We can choose, for example, average, count, min, max, standard deviation, variance. Really what we get is really kind of any options with respect to the subtotal function. So if you're familiar with the subtotal function, it works the exact same way here in the table total option. Now, we get our last column here. What's the total rows able to use on our column base where we would like to have our totals? And so some totals, for example, can be a sum. Some totals can be a count. It's really kind of up to us, determine what we might want to be. A count might, for example, be best suited over here in our total for our date column, so that we know we in fact have a total of 1 year's worth of data. Over here, for example, we can change this, and we can look at, instead of our total or a count, we can choose the standard deviation, or the min or the max or whatever we choose to use for this. Okay. Now, if we don't want that total row, because maybe we're going to add additional data, we can go ahead and unselect that total row. We'll see that will go away automatically. Now, one of the other things that we can do with this is that we can also add columns and rows to this dynamically. Okay. Now I'm going to use the control shortcut control D down here, but what I want you to see is what happens when we add additional rows to this data. So we use the control shortcut control D, and notice as we add additional rows, our table grows. You'll notice that the styling, for example, will automatically expand past this. And so we can see the styling, in this case, that blue banding of blue banding of rows will also extend beyond. So that makes these truly dynamic, especially as we start looking at tools like Power Query, where we're dynamically loading in data in real time from other places. This is a really great function because it makes the table automatically extend and contract based off of the number of records that are inside of its scope. And again, if we're using a pivot table or chart or any sort of other thing where the data set can be dynamic, this is great because it will automatically be in the scope of whatever object we've created. So it's a fantastic way to structure a pivot table. It will save you several clicks as you start to move throughout your project. Okay, so let's just go ahead and remove those extra columns. And what I also wanted to point out, let me just go ahead and add a new date here. So let's go ahead and add 01/2018 as an example here. Okay, and let's just go ahead and put in a little bit of data just as an example. Okay, notice my formula replicated. Okay, one of the great things about tables is if we add additional data, if we have any sort of formulas, okay, we're going to see those formulas automatically replicated in those new rows that are down there. So we can automatically keep our formulas in sync as new data is being added to our workbook. So it makes kind of the organization of this really, really kind of cool as well. Now, the other thing that's kind of cool is that it's not just with rows. We can actually do this in our columns as well. Let's come on over here to the top. And for the purpose of this, I'm just going to go ahead and delete our total here. And just so that you can kind of see this automatic extension, it wouldn't make sense to add data to the right of a total. So I'm just going to delete that column. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and add product G. Okay. Watch what happens when I add product G here. Okay. Notice that that table will automatically extend to that product G. Okay. Let's go ahead and add product H. Okay. Same thing. We'll see that new product column being added. We'll see that table being extended here as well. So they can grow dynamically to the bottom as well to the right. Now, let's go ahead and delete our product H here because we don't need it. Let's rechange our product G. Let's go ahead and change that from product G. Let's go ahead and change that to total. And let's talk about formula replication. And let's also talk about structured referencing. So one of the really cool things about tables is that they will automatically create your formula replication for you. Okay, most of you, for example, are used to creating your formulas. Let's say equals sum, and we can go ahead and we can select our data here. Okay, notice that our structure for the formula, notice it is a little bit different. I'll talk about that in a moment here. But one of the really cool things about tables is that it doesn't matter where you create your formula. Okay, in this case, I'm creating the formula on the first row relative to the table. But watch what happens when I hit enter here. Okay, notice it continues that all the way down. And so one of the cool things about tables is they auto-replicate these formulas. And if we need to make a change, let's say down here on row 31, and let's say I want to only get half of this data. So we'll do 0.5. I can make that change on row 31, and it's going to keep that entire column in sync. So if you're doing a lot of formulas, this is great because A, it will extend the formula for the duration of the data that you've got listed there. But then if you make a change, it will also update across the rest of the table as well for that particular column. So it has a strong desire to want to keep every column in sync with each other. It has a strong desire to want to keep that data correct and accurate with whatever formula you've provided. Now, you can manually do this, okay? So let's say, for example, I want to take this one field out and just have it sum, okay? You'll notice it will immediately auto-replicate. Okay, I'm going to hit Control Z, and if I do that Control Z, you'll notice it will throw an error, and we can see that it's an error right here. Let me scroll down a little bit, make it a little bit easier. Okay. You'll see that it's an error because it's got a little exclamation mark and then also a little green ear tag on the upper left-hand corner. Okay, and what that's going to tell me, if we look at this, inconsistent calculated column. Okay, now if I do this it's going to stop auto-replicating for that entire column. So if we need to keep a column, maybe have some different calculations in general, we can do that. But generally with tables, it wants to keep the column all using the same formula. And if we click this restore back to calculated column, we'll see that now column, if we go and make a change, it will remain in sync. And generally, when you make a change with respect to data inside of a table, you're generally making a whole change across the whole column. You're very rarely doing it, discrete calculations on a row by row basis. Generally, when we make a change, we're making a change across the whole item. And so generally, that's what I would recommend that you do. Okay, the next thing I want to reference, and funny I say reference, but the next thing I want to talk about with respect to our tables is structured referencing. So most of us are used to writing formulas inside of Excel, and there's the standard way of writing formulas is what we call structured referencing. Now with a structured reference, we're adding up items based off of where they are located inside of Excel. And so our standard way of doing this is, it's not structured referencing, but cellular referencing, is that we're referencing what cell something is living in. So for example, if I wanted to add up B2 to BH here, it would typically be something like this. I would do equals sum, and I would say B2, okay, you'll see that gets highlighted here to it would be H2 like this. Okay, and that would go ahead and sum that up. Actually, we don't want the total row, so we're going to go ahead and say G2. Okay, oops. There we go. And that's how we would reference that particular formula, And think about yourself. Think about yourself 6 months from now. Think about yourself a year from now, coming back into this workbook, and imagine it's a big old financial statement. Auditing formulas can be quite difficult if you don't remember what the heck B was or G was or F was, or what was in row 2, what was in row F, so on and so forth. Okay, and so the traditional way of referencing things in Excel really kind of depend on the user to have a lot of prerequisite knowledge about how this Excel workbook worked, and it also requires them to know where things are, and especially if it's a big old workbook with lots of different tables and worksheets in it, when we throw in, for example, different worksheets, remembering it can be quite difficult, and the auditability of this can be quite difficult. Now, if you remember, the first thing I recommended that you do when you create a table is that you go and you give it a name. Okay. One of the nice things is if you go to give it a name, in the future, when you want to find something inside of that table, or you want to use that table as in a formula, okay, the way that you would structure this would be the name of the table and then what you're looking for. Okay. Now there's a little bit of special syntax with respect to working with references inside of Excel, but kind of once you Excel tables, but once you kind of know the gotchas, they're not too difficult to work with. Okay. So as an example here, let's say I wanted to use this whole thing as a reference inside of a lookup formula. Okay. Well, what we would use is that we would use the name of the table, and then if we wanted to reference something specific inside of that lookup, we would then reference the columns names. So as an example here, this table is called, okay, if we come over to our table design ribbon, you'll see this is called sales. Now, if we come over here to column J and we just type in sales, and watch what happens when I type that in. Notice that as I start to type this in, okay, we get an auto completion for what we're looking for. Okay, auto completion is your friend. You should use it as much as you possibly can. And in fact, I don't remember how to structure every reference, every formula, or what everything is called, but generally the auto completion will know what the heck I'm looking for. And so as I start to type in sales, you'll see that sales table will pop up. And we know we're working with the table because it's got the table icon. That table icon looks like a table. There's no better way of describing it. It's got rows, it's got columns, a little spot for the header. And if I hit tab, you'll see that it auto completes. Okay. Now, with respect to this, you'll see that whole table now is blue. Okay. And because it's blue, I know that is in fact what I am referencing. And so if I wanted to reference this whole thing in like a lookup, I do E equals VLOOKUP, and a lookup has 4 arguments: what you're looking up, what you're looking up to, what you want back, and whether or not you want an approximate result. Okay, well, in this instance, where we would look up to, we would say the sales table, and it would know to substitute the word sales for the data in the raw data worksheet, column A1 to H365. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this with respect to maybe doing a count if formula. It's really simple. So we're going to do a count if formula, and a count if formula is a logical and conditional formula that will count the items in a particular array. So we're going to go ahead and just take our headers over here, and let's just go ahead and transpose this, and let's go ahead and remove our formatting. Just make it a little bit cleaner. And let's just go count the number, and then we'll try sum if as well for that's in product A. Oops, let's try this one more time. All right, and we're going to go equals count if. Okay, so what is our range? And so we're going to go ahead and say our range here would be our sales data. Okay, and specifically, sorry, we don't need to do a count if. We need to do equals a count. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and do count, open parentheses here, and we are going to do the sales table, and we're going to go ahead and tell it to do product A like this, and we're going to reference it that way. And we in fact get 365. Okay, so what this is telling us to do is to go run the count function on the sales table and specifically look at product A. Okay, so very simple with respect to how we would reference our formulas inside of here. Any normal reference inside of Excel, you would use parentheses. So any normal operation inside of Excel, like count, sum, whatever, you would use that operation with a parentheses. However, anytime that you're dealing with data inside of a table, you're always going to use a square bracket. Okay, so we can say sales table, the product A column. Okay, now if we come down here, let's try sum. Okay, so we're going to do sum sales table. We'll use the autocomplete option here. Square bracket, we're going to go ahead and tell it product B like that. And in fact, we get our sales there. Now, I can go ahead and do the rest of these here, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip. But just realize that tables make referencing these things fantastic. Okay, so it's the name of the table and then whatever column that you're traditionally referencing. Now, there are a couple of special operators that you should be aware of with respect to working with structured references inside of Excel. Okay, let's go ahead and expand upon that for a second. So we'll do equals sales table. Okay, and then I'm going to use a square bracket. And I want you to know there are a couple of additional special operators. For example, we have the @ sign. We have all data and headers. Okay, what this allows us to do is allows us to reference specific things that we might be looking for. So, for example, if I wanted to reference a specific thing like the date of this particular row, well, I can use the @ sign. The @ sign represents the current row. And so it says, literally, if you were to read this, the sales table, okay, go to the current row and get whatever value is in the date column. And if we click OK here, you'll see we in fact get that 1/2/2017. If we substituted out the word date for, let's say, total, like this, we'd in fact get that particular value listed right here. So that @ sign is great when you want to get that current row. Now we can also reference other specific things too. So for example, here, if we wanted to reference all the data, okay, we can reference all the data, including the headers and total rows. If we only wanted to get the data itself minus the header and minus the total rows, we can do that. And you'll notice the header row is not highlighted. And we can also say our headers as well as our totals. So if we just want to get our totals or we just want to get our headers, we can do that. And in fact, if you see here, sales pound headers just gets us that top row, that header row listed. And so if you know your operations with respect to tables, you can slice and dice these things any number of ways. And it makes it really great with respect to referencing things inside of formulas. Instead of having to reference where something is located, what I can do instead is I substitute the name of the table and then the specific columns that I would like to go and get them. And we're going to expand upon all of these different features and functions, and I'm going to really try to give you a good comprehensive understanding of how tables and data modeling work. I would say probably out of all the features and functions of Excel that I use every day, tables and data modeling are the ones that I probably use the most, and they're foundational to many of the other aspects inside of Excel. So if we're looking to create pivot tables in the future, or in fact, if we're looking to expand upon our knowledge and go to more comprehensive solutions, let's say, for example, like Power BI, well, this is a great way of learning the relational data model, which will be absolutely imperative to have a very strong understanding of in the future. So those are our main features and functions with respect to our tables. All right, so let's go ahead and have our final review question for the day. What external data sources can be used to create a data table? Okay, can you use data from a database? Can you use data from other spreadsheets, data from the web, or all of the above? Okay, well, the correct answer here is all of the above. Data for a table can come from anywhere. You can bring in data from other spreadsheets. So imagine you've got a master ledger and subsidiary ledgers, not a problem. You can use Power Query, for example, and bring in data from the web and dynamically load in a data set. And in fact, I've got a killer example how to do this with foreign currency transactions. And we'll take a look at that in future podcasts on this topic. And you can absolutely bring in data from a database. Whether you're working with data from Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, or wherever, you can absolutely load that data into Excel and be able to report upon that. And I'll give you plenty of examples of how to work with that as well. And in fact, if you are doing today's class for credit, I've included a sample database. It's a simple access database that you can try to dynamically load and create your own data sources from that access database. You can get a sense of what it looks like to use tables in conjunction with dynamic data coming from outside of Excel, in this case, from that access database. So check that out. All right, so what's coming up next time? Well, we're going to really kind of take a deeper dive into sorting and filtering our tables. We're going to dive deeper into using structured references, and we're going to do some different formula calculations. We'll do simple stuff like lookups and indexes and other things of this nature, as well as some more complicated formulas. I'm going to show you how to use tables as data sources through other aspects of Excel. So starting first with pivot tables, and we'll also look at some charts and graphs. And I'll give you plenty of additional data modeling functionality. And we're going to go really deep in that topic because it's so useful in so many different areas of Excel. And so today we primarily looked at the table functionality and some of the, let's say, nice to have features of Excel, but still water runs deep. There's so much more that this particular product can do. So stay tuned. We're going to take a deep look at that data modeling functionality. It's really going to change the nature of how you do your reporting, especially for those of you who are working with larger data sets. Well, this does bring us to the end of our presentation today. If you liked today's presentation, I would encourage you to consider liking our videos, subscribing, leave a comment below, let us know what you're interested in learning. You're welcome to follow us on social media. Most of our social media is at CPE Today. You're welcome to send us an email, questions@cpetoday.com. I'm particularly interested in if you've got any videos around Excel or Power BI or technology, accounting, things that you might be interested in for future content. So if you got anything, please let us know and feel free to reach out at any point. I do want to remind you that today's broadcast, podcast, and webinar is eligible for CPE credit. So if you are a financial professional, if you are a CPA or an EA, and you'd like to receive credit for today's class, and we hope you do, please go ahead and visit us over at cpetoday.com, and that's cpetoday.com. Course code for this course is ECX1, and take a short 5-question exam, earn a credit for today's class. In addition to your purchase, you will also get a copy of the learning materials. You can ask questions, and you can also participate in other awesome learning events. Now, stay tuned. Lots more great content coming up. Future webinars in the next week or so. We've got our second part of working with cloud technology in the coronavirus world. We're going to start a new series on Office 365, Google, Zoho, and other small business productivity suites. We'll have the